There is something immediately unsettling that happens to you whenever you replace the word meat with the word flesh. Something about that word drags us back to the primeval and makes our own flesh creep by reminding us of what meat actually is. Ask most people how many times a week they eat meat, and they will happily give you a quick estimate. Ask them how many times a week they eat flesh, and they will recoil from the word. Some will even say that they don't eat it at all. Never realizing how that simple shift in semantics has completely changed their perspective, despite the fact that the actual substance, the animal body, the tattered carcass they would happily chew under another name, remains exactly the same. It's still just meat, but it's also flesh, and of course this story will show wherever there's flesh, you always find the things that feed on that flesh. The only question is whether those things will have to hunt for it or not. The reason people get queasy about the word flesh is quite simple. Meat has become a synthesized product, a foodstuff, completely disassociated from the animal itself. It comes wrapped in polythene or on those small polystyrene trays from the supermarket and isn't linked in any way to its origin. In fact, studies have shown that people eat less meat if there's a picture of the animal anywhere near the product itself. That's why when you go to the supermarket, you'll find pictures of happily mooing cows next to the milk, but you won't find photos of cuddly woolly sheep next to the big hunks of bloody lamb. As long as we can separate the two ideas, meat and animals, everything is okay. Refer to that meat as flesh or as muscle tissue, and suddenly it becomes a lot less attractive and a whole lot less appetizing. I should know. I'm a butcher. My family has run Merton's, the main butchers in Morton, for almost the past 100 years. Our family business has been providing meat to the residents of this town and the surrounding villages for decades and through successive generations of my family. As a kid, I swore that the family business would not claim me, that I'd branch out on my own and go in a different direction, get a different job, and maybe get out of Morton altogether. But then I grew up. As a teenage lad with a healthy interest in the fairer sex and alcohol, I needed money. The quickest way to do that was to work shifts with my dad and brothers in the butcher's shop. At first, it was just weekends, then a few days in the week and some overtime spots. Soon enough, I was working 5 or sometimes 6 days a week for full shifts and taking orders and deliveries on the 7th day. It sounds stupid, but I sort of fell in love with it. Not just the serving behind the counter, being a bit of a local celebrity and someone that the community comes to rely on, but also the actual artistry of butchering, because make no mistake, it does take a great deal of skill. Looking at the carcass of a massive cow or a pig, and being able to extract the correct cuts of the best quality, getting everything you can from the one dead animal takes a whole range of skills. You need to know the anatomy, to understand the geography of each animal's body, to understand where to take which cut from. You also need surgical precision to make sure that one part is cut perfectly without snipping into another or rupturing things. You need a sculptor's care in extracting certain elements, because people won't buy steaks when they come in ragged strips of hacked over chunks. There is an artistry to butchering that is often overlooked. It's also bloody good money, if you'll pardon the pun, for the price of one animal bought from an abattoir, though of course we used to buy in bulk. The profit margin is enormous, especially if you know how to get the most out of each brute by not wasting the less attractive cuts. Even then though, there were some who could not understand how our family business had managed to rake in quite as much money as it had. Some folks, especially the ones in grey suits from out of town, became suspicious of our numbers and more particularly of our stock count. Those folks started to do their usual sniffing around, and of course, that led to problems. Particularly when they started to see how sometimes we sold meat and sometimes we sold flesh. The issues started with a man named Burton, a rude, uptight little pipsqueak from out of town who looked like he'd never eaten a decent-sized piece of meat in his life. His skin had a sort of greyish complexion that matched the colour of his suit, and he spoke in this weird whistling wheeze that made you want to cough just listening to him. His issue, he said, was with our accounts, and more specifically with one contract in particular. At first, the grey-suited man's questions had a very grey-suited sound to them. He wanted to look through our books and particularly the figures relating to our acquisition of an abattoir up on Peaks Lane and the flow of cattle coming in and out of that place. We had decided as a family about 10 years earlier to purchase and begin operating the abattoir as a way of keeping the costs down. By cutting out the middleman between us and the livestock farmers, we were able to make more of a profit. Employ folks to work the abattoir, ship the animals in and collect the carcasses each day for butchering. It was a pretty simple setup, but Burton wasn't happy. According to him, the number of cattle we recorded as going in did not match the number coming out in terms of the poundage we were selling in the shop. By his estimate, between 6 and 9 cows a week were recorded as going into the abattoir, but were not coming out as meat on the other side or being accounted for in our budgeting. This little pencil pusher had initially traced this back to a single contract we had with a company contract labelled only in our files as MCDC. As a representative of the government, he wanted to know what this contract involved and also why, according to our own figures, what amounted to a dozen cows was somehow bringing in almost as much money as the entire business at the butcher's shop for several days. At first, we said nothing. After all, we had signed that non-disclosure agreement and as such had been sworn to secrecy. Unfortunately, Mr. Burton was not a man to be told no and continued to sniff around our business. He went away for a week or two, but after a while, he came back. When he did, his tone had changed, and now he was spouting all sorts of wild and outlandish nonsense. He claimed that up near Acres Wood, they had found an enormous pile of animal bones. Skulls, rib cages, femurs and more, all belonged to cows, sheep and pigs that he believed he could trace back to us. As well as threatening us with environmental health and saying that we were in danger of spreading disease in the area by not disposing of the waste properly, he also said that he had sent the bones to be analysed to see if the tools used to strip them of meat matched the ones we used. The idea being that he would prove we were responsible for dumping the animals. I think at this point he believed he was going to prove some kind of tax dodge by showing that we were selling meat at inflated prices to a conglomerate who then disposed of the animals in some odd way. It was only when he got the results back that his tune began to change. Coming to see me for the third time in as many months. He looked positively hollow, never a picture of health to begin with. He looked positively ill, as if he'd had some kind of fright. Of course, I already knew the reason for his appearance. He'd gotten a glimpse of the truth. He asked if we could meet somewhere quiet, so I took him into the back offices and poured him a coffee, which he didn't touch.
"You're feeding it, aren't you?"
he said, almost in a whisper. When I said I had no idea what he was talking about, he just shook his head. From his briefcase, he produced a bundle of newspaper clippings, or at least photocopies of them that he had gotten from some library or other. The stories were all about all the pagan festivals in the area, about how, at one time, locals in this area would take cows out to the edge of the village and tie them to the offering post just near the entrance to Acres Wood. Of how those cows were left there for the CrookBack to take. According to the legend, dating back as far as the Middle Ages or even further, the CrookBack, which to modern eyes looked like some kind of skinwalker, lived somewhere in those woods. Every few months it would come out from the spaces between the trees and descend upon the town. Then there would be mourning. A child snatched from its bed through an open window. An old woman unable to run away would be heard screaming by villagers far too afraid to open their doors and look. One account told of how the following day there were tracks in the snow, long grating lines of fingernails digging into the earth, trying to clutch and grasp on for purchase as something from behind dragged the poor victim away into the black between the trees. Eventually, as the story went on, the town decided to appease the creature by giving an offering, tying up a cow or a pig once a month for the thing to take, feeding it so that it didn't need to hunt. After that, as long as the offering was made, the children of the town were safe. In later years, responsibility for making these offerings fell to the town butcher, who received a small donation from the townsfolk each month to pay for the animal that was to be tethered up and consumed. Burton believed he had stumbled upon a link.
"The bones,"
he said slowly.
"they are covered in teeth marks. They've been chewed and gouged by something that tore the meat off the bone. The bite marks look human, but they can't be. They're too big and some of the teeth are far too pointed and sharp."
I said nothing in response. I just let him weave his wild stories.
"I looked into MCDC, it's Morton Council Dairy Concerns, basically a shell company set up by the local council to pay money to you. so that you'll take the meat up there every week to feed whatever it is that's waiting in those woods. What is it? Some kind of spirit or demon? A cryptid? An animal?
Again, I said nothing. His accusations were serious and did sting a little, but they were also ridiculous. Outlandish and insane enough that no court in the land would believe them, even if they did turn out to be true.
What I don't understand is the number. The old reports say once a month. 1 animal a month. This is once a week and multiple animals. How many times are you feeding it? How many animals are you feeding it? What is it, damn you? Tell me.
I thanked Mr. Burton for his time, and as I led him to the door somewhat forcefully, I assured him that I knew absolutely nothing about these so-called cryptids and monsters living in the woods, let alone the idea that a local family butcher's might be feeding them as part of a contract with the local council. Those words stopped Burton, who had been moving toward the exit, dead in his tracks.
Wait, you said them and monsters? Monsters plural. There's more than one of these things. That's why you're feeding them more?
Maybe, I said with a smile. That's the thing with animals, you see. If you feed them, they grow, and once they grow, they breed. I never saw Burton again, and oddly, neither did anyone else. He disappeared around 2 days later. His missing persons file is still open to this day. In a weird coincidence, though, our order from MCDC was slightly different that week. They asked for 1 less cow. Apparently, on that occasion, they found some flesh from another source.